children of all ages, welcome to Certifiably Delicious. This is going to be a 90-minute, where'd my notes go? This is going to be a 90-minute panel discussion on uncertified agave spirits. Now, originally, I had asked my fellow panelists if we could, oh, wait, nope, that's not what I want to do. Hang on. If we could instead use the name, I worked on this for a while, Uncertified Agave Spirits, Threat or Menace. And nobody actually would let me do that. So instead it is Certifiably Delicious. That's what we're doing this evening. Okay, so as I said before we started recording, there are over 150 people who signed up for this. This is being, as a consequence, I think I can only get 100 people into my Zoom. This is being live broadcast at the same time over on YouTube. People on YouTube, sorry, I can't get questions from you. The only questions I can get have to come through. Let's go to Ecuador. The only questions I can get have to come through the Q&A of Zoom. Now, you people who are putting questions up on Zoom, you're not going to actually see any answers, and nobody can see them except me and my fellow panelists. I'm going to go through them when we get to the Q&A section. So if you've got something you want to ask, throw it in there. This is the only way I know of to manage 150 people. So this originated as an idea to bring like roughly 10 hospitality people on a tour of Oaxaca. It was a conversation that we all had in mid-February, which was like not even 90 days ago. And we thought we would do it in August or September. And now here we are, instead doing it for the entire world via Zoom. So the tape is going to be available after. I'm going to send everybody an email who signed up, send you an email that has a link to that tape that follows up with some of the things that I'm sure will come up this evening in this session. I will also, after I've sent that out, I will remove your email address from the sacred mailing list. So if you want to stay on the sacred mailing list, I'm going to need you to just sign back up. So what is Sacred? So Sacred is a nonprofit that I founded back in 2017, the purpose of which is to improve quality of life in the rural Mexican communities where heritage agave spirits are made. And it is through that work where we've helped to fund the building of libraries, we've replanted agave, we did some earthquake relief. It's through that work that I've met all of these people that I get to talk to tonight. And they're some of my very favorite people. So I want to introduce the guests first. All of them live in Oaxaca. Having said that, Niki is trapped in New York as a result of the quarantine. Accurate, Niki? Oh, apparently I have to unmute her.
To unmute myself, yes. I'm currently, quote unquote, stranded in New York City.
But you do live full-time in Oaxaca?
I do live full-time in Oaxaca.
Okay, so we've got Niki Nakazawa and we've got Max Rosenstock from Neta. Did I pronounce that correctly, or is it Neta? Neta.
It's Neta.
Thank you. And we've got, and I should mention, so my first real connection with Max that I can remember, he tells me we were drinking in 2015. And I rarely remember when I'm drinking. But my first recollection of Max is when I found out that one of the mezcaleros I had been visiting a few months before had been affected by the earthquakes. And I had visited his palenque and saw no indication of any destruction from earthquake. And he reached out to me because I was doing a promotion and I used some of that mezcalero's spirits in the promotion. And he thought, based on the fact that we do fund quality of life programs in these rural communities, that maybe we'd want to help. So we did a fundraiser on our end, he did a fundraiser on his end, and together we raised enough money for this mezcalero, who shall remain nameless because we don't like to talk about people that we give the money to.
Worked out really well. Yeah, thank you, Lou.
Yeah, he was able to rebuild his house. He and his family repaired the house, and he was no longer forced to live somewhere else. So no, thank you, Max. So that's how I got to know Max and how I got to know Neta. And And so then the next guest, Alex from Rezpiral, Alex White, every time that he and I talk, I found that he's found another way to give away what little money he seems to make with Rezpiral. And I make a lot of jokes about Alex, and I call him my favorite hippie, and he resists the hippie tag, but I mean it in the very best way. And this is true of all three of these brands, is they give back so much to the communities from which they purchase these spirits. And Alex blows me away every time I talk to him, because he does this profit sharing deal. He takes seeds from the community. He built a nursery and then plants the seeds and germinates them, and then gives them back the seedlings to replant on their lands. So yeah, I'm impressed as hell with Alex, and I just wish he'd get a haircut. And so then the third party in this evening's session is Jason Cox. And Jason is my oldest of all of these friends, so I must have known him for like 4 years now. Which, it seems like the last 2 weeks have been 4 years.
I believe Alex is pretty old, actually.
I'm sorry, say again?
Alex is definitely older than me, man.
Okay, we're not going to have this fight because I'm going to win. So I met Jason in the way that everybody meets in Agave Spirits, right? Agave makes the world so small. And I was just walking down a street in Oaxaca Centro, and I told the story again to Jason later. He didn't remember it, and he thought it was funny because Jason tends to be kind of shy, and he's not one for self-promotion. But Jason was standing out in front of his restaurant as I was walking by, and he stopped me and said, "Hey, do you like mezcal?" And I thought, I guess it's written on my forehead. And so I was on the way somewhere else, so I didn't go in that night. But I had remembered that somebody I was traveling with had said, "This place, El Destilado, that's a restaurant you have to check out." So I went back the next night or 2 nights later, and I've been going back ever since. And Jason and I do a lot of traveling together through rural Mexico, and he's one of my favorite travel partners. So those are our guests this evening. You guys, you haven't included. Oh, this is what we forgot in the setup. You haven't included your. Cinco. Okay, so you'll see that Jason has included in his name on screen his tag for Instagram and Facebook, and I'm hoping that before we're done, that I'll get that out of my other panelists. And if you
did it.
God bless you, Niki. And if any of you out there end up posting anything to social media about this, positive or negative, please tag us. If it's negative, tag me. If it's positive, you can tag the rest of them. So with that, I think we should just get into this. We're going to start with each of the brands introducing themselves and giving a brief overview. So Niki and Max, tell me a little bit about Neta.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. And thank you, Lou, for being entertaining and setting this whole thing up. So Neta is a pretty slow evolving project and Destilado de Agave brand that began as a one-man band with Max back in 2012, which is when he was first introduced to Hermógenes Vázquez and Paula Aquino Sanchez, who are two of the producers and a married couple who we work with. And after he initially met Paula and Hermógenes, he later, he started bringing some of these spirits to Oakland, where he was living at the time. And there was introduced to the whole crew from Mezcalistas, met Mike Whipple, who some of you may know and love. And Mike was like, I think you're really onto something with this mezcal. It's incredible. And Mike had been working in wine and encouraged Max and got the guys from Prize Fighter on board and kind of a little fire there. And so after a few years of Max traveling back and forth between Oaxaca and Oakland and sharing these spirits among this growing mezcal fan club in Oakland, in California, in San Francisco, in the Bay. He was like, okay, like maybe this could be something. And so during this whole time when he was traveling back and forth between Oaxaca and Oakland, he was staying with me and my boyfriend at the time in Mexico City. So I moved to Mexico City in 2007, and around 2011, 2012, I started this pop-up restaurant called Pichon, and I was working with small farmers in like 100-kilometer radius from Mexico City, the heart of Mexico City, and working particular with farmers in Xochimilco. And so he was like, oh, I was running this pop-up restaurant, producing all these events. Tomas, my ex-boyfriend, has a record label. And so we just thought we'd start throwing these parties together and help fund some of the research that Max was doing in Oaxaca. So he would come through our place with like tons of mezcal, and then we would throw these little speakeasy parties, raise some money so that Max could keep exploring these spirits, and yeah, and so he asked me to join the project formally, and this was in like 2014, 2015. And I was still running my pop-up for a few years. And it wasn't until our third partner, Yusuke Murayama, he comes into the picture in this, like, you could consider it the third or fourth act of this story, in 2017. And he is an old-time friend of mine who I met when we were volunteering in Costa Rica with Amigos de las Americas in 2003. So we were both 18. And he has a proper business background, and he runs his family company, and he had kind of the business acumen and the vision to help us bring what was kind of a lifestyle project for Max and I to the next place, which was actually creating a company, and that was in the financial position to export and all that. So at that point that we got the advice from Yusuke, I was able to make the decision to move to Oaxaca from Mexico City, and that was 2018. Max had already moved down to Oaxaca and had been back and forth between Oaxaca and Oakland for maybe 7 years. And yeah, that's kind of like, in a nutshell, our story. And we're, a brand based in Oaxaca. Both Max and I live there, and we work almost exclusively with the community of Logoche / La Chihuizo in Mihuatlan. And our mission is to bring these beautiful spirits from Mihuatlan to the market and promote the terroir and the gusto histórico of this producing region.
That's beautiful. Thank you very much, Niki. Max, you want to add something to that?
That was pretty well summed up. Yeah, well done, Niki. We move on.
Well, before we move on, though,
I answer some other questions.
Okay. Yes, you do.
Yeah.
But before we move on, actually, I had a very specific question that I think fits into the introduction, and it's a question: is Neta available in Chicago? And I think the better question,
Not currently.
Well, so which markets are you in, and do you have plans to expand?
At the moment, we are in California, New York. A little bit just arrived to Quebec fairly recently, which has been handled through Mezcal Brothers out in France, who've been doing a hell of a job. And yeah, Niki can speak very well to that. That's kind of what got her trapped in New York in the first place. Yeah, hopefully more to come soon.
Okay, well, we have specific requests now for Chicago and Texas. So there you go. Okay, thank you, Niki, and thank you, Max. And up next is Jason Paul Cox of Cinco Sentidos.
All right. Well, first, just a moment to, this is really exciting, in what counts as excitement these days, to get together with a group of these five. This is, I've got deep friendships with everyone involved in this panel. Max, I'm getting to know you, but I like you. But these are it's really cool. It's really fun to be sharing a quote unquote stage with people who are who I know their projects as well as they know mine, and I know that they work hard in and out, and they all have we all kind of have a similar mentality in certain things and different in other things, and one way or another, they've been kind of my lifeline or support network when we run into complicated business decisions and things that we don't always understand or know how to solve or advance. So personally, this is really cool. You know, again, Lou had alluded to maybe bringing down a few people. This was something that we started talking about a few months ago, but I'm happy now that we've got, you know, we're able to share a little bit about our projects to a larger audience in these strange times. With that said, Cinco Sentidos, which means 5 senses. This started basically as a house brand. I first came to Oaxaca in 2015. I used to be an interpreter, and I came down here to basically refine or perfect some of my Spanish speaking ability, in particular in jurisprudence terms. And I came here, and on night number 2, I went to a mezcaleria. I sat through a tasting through a mutual friend, and I fell in love with it. I'm kind of I can be kind of obsessive, and I just fell down the rabbit hole. And by the time I had to leave Oaxaca within a month, you know, I had collected, you know, more bottles than my suitcase could hold. I literally donated clothes just so I could go back and bring mezcal back, have all the space, shared it with my friends, and started, you know, nerding out about it a bit more on the internet. And at the time I was living in Columbus, Ohio, where mezcal is still not on anyone's radar. So I found myself as that friend in a group bringing these really badass spirits and then kind of geeking out and talking about it. And eventually I decided to go back to Oaxaca. I wanted to get involved a little bit more. And at this point, I'd already had met my now business partner at El Destilado. He's our head chef. His name is Joseph Gilbert. And I started working at a mezcaleria. Joseph was working at a restaurant here. We were buddies, we were roommates. And after 3 or 4 months of like us kind of, you know, convening over mezcals at the bar I was working at night after shifts, the wheel started spinning about opening a place together. And if you've been to Oaxaca, you know that every restaurant and every bar kind of has their own mezcal de la casa or destilado de agave de la casa. So this was something that was essential for our restaurant, you know, to go and source things yourself and have something that's unique to your place. And you know, most places might have like, you know, a restaurant might have 3 or 4 options, maybe 6. We have somewhere around 40 now, but really inspired by the great mezcalerias here that offer diversity and, you know, in terms of agave production methods, regional typicities, etc. So that is how Cinco Sentidos gets started. We currently export, you know, we kind of work with 5 core producers. The bulk of their production we export to the States. And we also highlight 3 or 4 other families' productions as well, just in the restaurant. As a brand, our goal is to demonstrate agave variety, production technique, terroir, different regionalities, then also try to be, as best as we can, be a good bridge to the market with the families we work with, and also help explain, you know, what it is that drives them and how they make the mezcal or the destilado de agave that they distill.
Beautiful. Thank you, Jason. I'm just going to go back for a second, though, to something you said earlier about how you literally left clothes behind to get more spirits back home when you went home, because it reminds me of our mutual friend Michael Sager. And the first couple times that I met him in Oaxaca, he was always dressed like this crazy hobo, and he explained to me finally that he would just bring all the clothes with him every time he went to Oaxaca, bring all the clothes with him that he had intended to get rid of, and that's what he would wear, and then he would just leave. He'd have one set of clothes that he actually wanted to keep, and that's all he would wear back home so that he could get more alcohol into his bag. God bless Michael Sager. Just wanted to say that.
I think it's just an excuse for poor dressing.
Yeah, fair. Thank you very much for that. And then last, but of course not least, Alex, the hippie white. Alex, can you tell us a little bit about Rezpiral?
Yeah, my name is Alex, and yeah, I first arrived in Oaxaca in 2013, and by way of an art project. I used to, well, I guess I used to work as an urban planner, and then I became an artist, and then I kind of combined the two and ran this practice called artifacting. And the idea with this practice was to use culture and cultural facilitation as a way of, organizing communities and creating agency amongst people. So it was a practice I was actually doing in a lot of different parts of the world. And I had a girlfriend who had just come back from Mexico City. I was living in Brooklyn at the time. And she had just come back from Mexico City, and she just said, "Oh, I'd love to live in Mexico City for 6 months." And it just struck something in me, and I just kind of set off on a search to make it happen. And I found a way and came to Oaxaca in 2013, where essentially I was in a colony called Patria Nueva, which is in Viguera. It's a little bit outside Oaxaca, and I was there for 6 months, essentially knocking on people's doors and trying to bring neighbors together, right? So this whole project was 6 months of trying to activate like these dead public spaces and try to reverse people's psychology, where the thought was, don't get into trouble, don't talk to your neighbors. So the whole idea was working with someone from this neighborhood. The whole idea was to bring people together and help people create new forms of work amongst each other. So that was like a 6-month project, and it was just knocking on people's doors. I think we organized like 25 events in the streets, like if you can imagine meetings in the streets amongst neighbors and facilitating conversation and really helping people to see that what people wanted wasn't individual, but it was actually communal, and trying to turn like an individual vision into a collective vision, and using that as like a way forward to, develop certain things or trust more than anything in this neighborhood. So that was 6 months, and it worked, and it became kind of a movement, and it lasted for about 3 years. We ended up building like an autonomous community center, which was pretty amazing. It's as far as I've been able to take one of these projects. And I think at the same time, I was, found myself really interested in Mezcal and really enjoying the taste, and also becoming cognizant of the fact that, you go to these small mezcalerias, and all the good mezcal is not one that's readily available commercially, at least in Oaxaca. And also, coming to understand that the best producers and the smaller producers oftentimes don't get to play in the game, right? I think, which is the case with a lot of different industries and things in general. So for me, it really felt, Mezcal at the moment really felt like a space where I could advocate for a lot of things, but in an economic way, bringing values into the game, which for me was really, it was daunting because I was, mostly used to advocating for things more in like a conceptual sense as an artist. And this was really saying that, well, what potentially can be done here is you can create maybe power with these values that are typically left kind of, for people to call hippie and things like that. So that was a little bit of the vision, and then I kind of had to set out to find a way to make it happen. And there were, obviously, as everyone here knows, there's so many things to navigate. So that was kind of the beginning of, those were the seeds to the project.
Okay, lovely. And you want to tell us about your dog?
Sure, although she's sleeping, she'll probably get really pissed if I wake her up.
Don't wake her up. Just talk about her, because I love your story about your dog.
Nina, actually, it's interesting. There is a story with the dog, because it was actually right at the end of this project in this Colonia Patria Nueva, where I was kind of leaving, and I showed up at this little public space we had created. We created this big hydroponic garden on a wall. It was pretty cool. And I was there one day, and there was this spotted dog who was kind of just looking at me. And so I kind of looked back at her, and she just kept looking at me. And then there was a guy selling coconut water there at the time, so I bought some coconut water. I gave her some, she really liked it. And then she started following me. And so she followed me, and then I decided to get her to buy some dog food, and she devoured it, and she kept following me. And then I went to this little restaurant where we all hung out, which was a restaurant that the mother of my colleague, she ran it. And I asked her, I said, what do you think about this dog? And she said, oh, that's a street dog. Take it home. No one's going to care for it. And so I thought about it, and I called my girlfriend and I said, Chani, there's this beautiful dog here. What do I do? And she said, what do you mean, what do you do? You take it home. And so, I had my bicycle, so I was like, I just picked her up on the bicycle and, kind of rode home one-handed, and she's been following me ever since. That was probably I think that was 4 years ago.
Ah, she's such a beautiful dog. If she does wake up, even if you're muted, I want you to pick her up and put her in your lap, okay? Promise?
Okay, promise.
Okay, beautiful. Okay, and with that, let's get to the actual Q&A portion of this evening. So it's funny, the first question that we already had is sort of echoed by a question we just received from Brett Kozin. So Brett asked, says he'd love to hear from you guys, Niki and Max, on some of the details of how the co-op functions and why you choose to set it up that way. But the actual question we had, which feels to me like it still covers this, is, so what does your relationship with producers look like? Do you guys have exclusive relationships with the producers that you source your spirits from? And do you find yourself ever sourcing from the same producers as Jason or Alex or any other brands?
I'll take a stab at that. So our commercial relationships today all stem from the relationships that kind of started to be developed in 2012, 2013, through the time that I was spending in kind of the San Luis Amatlan part of Mia Wetland. I was kind of holed up in the Sierra Sur for 6 to 8 months of that year, split it up between Oakland a little bit, and just kind of had this proximity to the valley that I was really curious about. And Mezcal became this really wonderful lens and actually a practical excuse to explore these communities. Mia Wetland today has this wonderful growing fame of producing fantastic Mezcal, but it also has some not so great reputations locally. And so Mezcal really provided sort of access to be able to get to know more about Mia Wetland and things that I was curious about. And a friend of mine had been planting corn for Reina Sanchez and ended up harvesting some agave with Hermogenes. And we were drinking this Madre Quiche at the time that was just mind-blowing. And so one thing led to another, and my friend Hope took me out to Logoche, which Lachihuizlo area, and everything just kind of developed from there. Hermogenes, after really almost a 2-year period, introduced me to the co-op, which was founded in 2008, 2009 by these kind of 3 extended families that are the residents of Logoche. It's a community of about 120 people, and they're all related in some fashion and live next to each other and all work together. Part of being in that community entails participating in Tequio, which is a communal work system that has existed in Mesoamerica for thousands of years. And so the co-op really is kind of like a legal structure that supports the kind of Tequio work and the way in which the community has made Mezcal for the last 200 plus years. So it really was kind of like an organic evolution for them, and being able to access certain resources and participate in this new legal structure in a way that made sense to them. And so we're not members of the co-op, we just work hand in hand. And yeah, I don't know if Niki, there's something you want to add to that question about the co-op?
Yeah, so concretely, the co-op is composed of 12 members. And one of the members is living in the United States. So, they're a part of it, but they don't really count. And so they have one of their family members assigned to making decisions on their behalf. So the way we basically work with everybody in who makes mezcal in Logoche. And we don't have any binding contracts with anyone. We I mean, now is high season for production. And so normally either Max or I would be spending most of our time in Logoche, kind of figuring out what people are making, what's going in the ovens, what they're harvesting. And then based on that, making selections and working kind of hand in hand with some of the producers to decide what lots we're going to take on. And a lot of the work that I do is trying to figure out how to create partnerships or figure out who in the market can take on some of these smaller lots. And yeah, I don't know if that answers the question. And then kind of looping it back into the second part of the question, Lou, that you asked about whether there's any overlap between Neta, Rezpiral, and Cinco Sentidos. Not really. I mean, I think that what's cool and fun is that we all do work with producers in Mihuatlan. And Alex, you can speak to this, but Alex works with Reina Sanchez, and Reina is a dear friend of Max and I's and a really important member of the Lachihuiso Logoche community. She was my madrina, godmother for my birthday party 2 years ago. She is often the madrina for many of the community parties. She's a respected businesswoman and broker in the region. And then Jason works with Atenogenes, who, while the producers that we work with don't know him personally, he has his fame and his fama, and people are familiar with the mezcals that he makes. And so there is a way in which, you know, folks producing mezcal in the region are aware of one another and the quality of the spirits they produce. And I've had the privilege to meet a lot of the producers that Jason works with. And as he mentioned before, we really are, you know, a part of a community, and we call each other and we're in touch about, you know, decisions that need to be made or things that we're facing in our businesses. So, yeah.
You know, it strikes me that since you, Neta, is so focused on one community, that there's the likelihood of that kind of crossover in producers is slim. But I believe Jason and Alex both, both source from Berta Vasquez. Is that accurate?
I mean, I work with her quite a bit.
And you get some from her, right, Jason? Like,
we've Berta's a sweetheart. We have purchased 4 or 5 batches from her in the past 2 or 3 years, but for Mexico or for Europe. So I know Alex is a lot more involved with Berta from the day to day, especially in terms of reforestation of agave and production calendar. Berta is, like, yeah, really have a special, sweet, you know, soft spot on my heart for Berta. And there's been a couple of times where she's, you know, called me up and like, hey, I got some new Madre Cuiche. When's the next time you're coming around? And she makes delicious spirits. So we picked up some small batches from her throughout the course of time, but I wouldn't say that she fits into like our like core model, if that makes sense.
Sure. Okay.
But I'd say it's also the nice thing about, you know, I take value in respecting like the independence of producers, and, you know, just recognizing the reality of their everyday work in which they produce mezcal and they need to sell mezcal. So I think, obviously, I think we're all limited in terms of how much we can bring at any one time. You know, there's a lot of different factors that we're kind of constrained by. So I think it's, of course, it's how a lot of mezcaleros make a living, is by being able to sell to a whole handful of people. I think it's nice when there's a community like this where, you know, in the best case, you have a handful of people, not just buying, but supporting different mezcaleros, because as we all know, it's, you know, it's not perilous, but it's a quite difficult way of life.
Yeah, I think just to chime in on that too about exclusivity for a second. I think that some of the producers, I think Berta is one in particular, but Alex can say this more so. I think Berta enjoys having multiple clients. I think Berta enjoys the fact that she has a few different people that purchase from her, that bottle her mezcal. The same is true with the producer I work with, who's Armando Alvarez and Iscatlan. He has 4 or 5, heavy clients, if that makes sense, and we're just one of them. We all have different relationships in one way or another, but exclusivity is a challenging thing to work towards. It's not really, it's really challenging to tell. I would never consider telling a producer only sell to me if there's a desire to sell to other clients as well. And I think that's an important factor that goes into maybe us being destilado uncertified too. Exactly. But that's a whole other conversation, maybe for later.
Okay, so we'll keep you unmuted, Jason, because the next question is for you. So on a recent blog post on Maestros del Mezcal, Ryan Toll, did I just butcher his name? Ryan Toll?
No, it's correct.
Oh, God bless. So Ryan suggests that the increasing worldwide interest in heritage agave spirits is causing the price of these spirits to go beyond the local market's ability to continue consuming them, right? So with that in mind, Jordan Crandall asks, how do you, Jason, balance that beautiful and good part of sharing these spirits with the broader world while still protecting the spirits as not just a product, but as a very important part of a special community and a special place?
That's a conversation that I've had with every producer. And it's kind of up to the producers at the end of the day. There is a very real perception or real fear of like the gentrification of mezcal, and what Ryan mentions is true. That's what's happening. I mean, there is the local price, the floor price continues to decline every year, in part because of agave scarcity, in part because people are recognizing that this is more valuable than what people used to sell it for, and in part because brands come in sometimes and establish a higher selling price. To me, it kind of depends on what the producer wants to do. Now, again, Armando, referencing him again, in Iscatlan, he's a producer who's always going to have mezcal around for the town fiesta, which is going to be something that he's going to donate. People from other communities will come by and scoop up. And he and the producers of his village are very conscientious about the buying power of those buyers. So Armando knows that we bottle his mezcal, and bottling adds a premium, and it goes to the States. So our price is negotiated differently than the price for the neighbor who wants a liter, or the neighbor who wants 20 liters, because we know what it's for. Is it for your consumption, or is it for business purposes? The same thing is true with Tío Pedro and Minas. It's almost heartbreaking sometimes to taste some new batches he'll have, and he'll have something that's like a 42-liter batch, and it's just knockout, and drinking with him and his wife, and and it's time to like, all right, we're gonna be on our way. He's like, you can take 20. It's like, there's only 40. He's like, yeah, but Andrea really likes this, So it's like, there's this, whether it's a local consumption or whether it's with family and neighbors or just personal consumption, that's something that we're always gonna respect the desire of the distiller to determine how much they hold on to and how they deal with that.
Cool, great. Anybody else have any thoughts on that you want to add?
Yeah, I just second what Jason said, which I think it's also, the beautiful thing of things down here where there is this relativity and there is this understanding that there's different worlds. It's not like an economic formula where, the price gets set and then everyone has to pay it. No, of course there's different worlds that a mezcalero understands, and it's very situational, as Jason said. There's a festival. There's some for export, and I think, while it's not, it's not practiced in an analytical way. It's just, I think, the everyday realities of mezcaleros, where they understand that they're positioned, with big client, but at the same time positioned in sometimes, functioning part of usos y costumbres in a very traditional part with the municipio. And then there's people that maybe come and I can pay you a lot, or I can pay you a little, or I need to sell now, so I'll put the price at this. Or I got this really good thing that I won't sell unless it's expensive. So I think my experience is that for the most part, most producers show that flexibility, complete flexibility. And I just say, and I think they also recognize that this recent boom in mezcal, I mean, whether it persists for a long time or not, I get the sense that it's still being seen as a thing, and there still are other things that are alive at the same time. So I get the sense that mezcaleros they're not convinced that it's been taken over by one world.
Beautiful. Max, do you want to address that?
I want to just add one extra thing that really affects all of that, and even a mezcalero's ability to sell at a certain price locally. And that has to do with the market price of agave, which is set by Jalisco and industrial in the state of Jalisco, and principally out of tequila. And so the price in Jalisco might be 35 pesos a kilo. Here, that's 25 in Miahuatlan. Is kind of like the mezcalero, the palenquero, is left with, there's only a certain amount he can kind of maneuver with, how he can move with his pricing, because alternatively, you could turn around and sell your green agave on the market through a coyote or to a big company in Mazatlan as well, and make more money in a day than you could turning it around and producing it, turning it to mezcal rather, and selling it locally, or even exporting it. Right. That plays a tremendous role in the baseline of any mezcal price in any community.
Nice.
Yeah, absolutely. And if it's not to, fray too far from the subject, I think it's, I think at some point we'll talk about the planting of agave. But to me, absolutely, Max, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, it is the input that really limits, in some ways, the flexibility of a mezcalero, price-wise, because they have to incur that cost. The only alternative is if a mezcalero have their own agave. And if you don't have your own agave, you're kind of at the helm of market pricing, right? And I think that's where I'm definitely seeing, speculation kick in, where all of a sudden someone says, no, I'll sell this to you for 18 pesos a kilo.
Oh yeah.
Last year it was 10 pesos a kilo. And depending on the situation of mezcalero, it becomes this risk you have to take. And then just to break even, well, then you're talking at a higher price. And then in that situation, then the practice of giving to the local festival or giving to the municipio, that's when it becomes maybe more difficult. Mm-hmm. So, and that, I think it leads into the idea of why also growing agave can really support the autonomy and the sovereignty of mezcaleros.
Right on.
That makes sense.
Yeah. So I'm also just going to go back to mention, just because. So Jordan also sent a note that Mazonte, that Pedro from Mazonte told him that they only buy 60% of each batch that they sell, so that the other 40% stays local in the community. And I just say that because I love Pedro and I love Mazonte, and my favorite place in the entire world to drink is Mazonte in Guadalajara. So I just wanted the excuse to say that, really, when it comes right down to it. Okay, next question then. Hey, Niki, as a follow-up to that, Jordan writes, I've heard that back in the day, I don't know which day that is, but back in the day, all that people drank were ensembles, but now because of demand from outside, they are making more single agave expressions. Is this a phenomenon that responsible brands or consumers should try to counter, or not?
So a few things there. I think that one, yes, for the most part, most traditional productions of mezcal were ensembles. However, that's not the case across the board. I think that there are some communities that did naturally separate wild agaves like Tobala and Tepestate. And then I think that this really ties into what Alex and Jason and Max were just talking about with land management and the way in which mezcal production actually functions in the campo. So at least where we are in Logoche, everybody owns their own land. And so what happens on that land is kind of up to them. And also because of the natural topography of this part of Miwatlan, where you have some flat areas and then quite a bit that's left like mountainous and rugged, you know, you can't intensely cultivate across the board. Like some of your land is just going to be naturally in a state of wilderness. So you will naturally have wild agaves growing on your land regardless. And it's a part of a healthy ecosystem. I think that any of us who have spent time walking fields or walking some of the mountainsides where you find Tepestat and Tobala, and how robust they are and how much water a Tepestat can retain, you understand like that they have a particular role in this ecosystem. So culturally, people are going to be drinking whatever is growing on their land. You know what I mean? It's not it doesn't mean that you're a more responsible consumer just to consume ensembles or espadín, for example. I think that it's a natural extension of experimentation, people observing the differences between different plants. It's an opportunity for expression as well. And then just on the topic of this idea of single agave, it's not necessarily entirely true. So while we may have, you know, a biquiche release, it's 100% biquiche, but loosely speaking. They're a cultivar of Karwinski. So Max, you can correct me if I'm using the wrong terminology, but they're not true to seed. So it means that there's quite a lot of genetic diversity in that one bottle of bequeath that you have. So they're not exact clones of one another. So you have like some tall bequeath, some short bequeath, some fat bequeath. So there's still a lot of diversity in those bottlings. So yeah, I don't know, Max, if you have something to add there.
Just a reference that I always have regarding this conversation comes from Lalo in Minas. And I think he told me most recently, so the plant that most closely resembles what they call biquiche in Miahuatlan that grows in the Central Valleys in that Santa Catarina, Minas area, they call largo or tobasiche. And Lalo told me that there are over 55 types of tobasiche or largo that he's seen in his experience. And you ask people in Miahuatlan how many different types of biquiche they've seen, and you know, people have different numbers in their list. But as Niki said, there's not like a monolithic biquiche plant out there. There's quite a bit of morphological variance between all these different plants. And even in the case of something like Madre Quiche, maybe, you know, even then you have like a Madre Quiche Cenizo and a Madre Quiche Verde, and sometimes those get mixed in, or they're confused for a Tobasiche. And so, yeah, you don't really have these super singular expressions unless the plant is cloned.
Yeah, they're like loose categories or like ways of groupings, you know, because you'll see the genetic variance when you just walk a field. So, you know, I think that in any case, whether they be labeled as ensembles or not, they kind of naturally are a mix of a lot of different things.
Or rather can be, right?
Can be.
It's not always the
be.
rule.
Sure.
Like, there's certainly somebody out there is cloning espadín, I'm guessing.
Quite commonly.
Yeah,
More
yeah.
often than not, actually. It's rarely found in seed form at this point. But I think an important point here would be that the making and consumption of ensembles is generally a little bit more, maybe not sustainable, that word's a little bit tricky, but in terms of land management, it's kind of the most responsible. And even a lot of mezcaleros or palenqueros that make these singular expressions aren't banging those out constantly. It's like maybe once a year or once every 3 years, you can work with this certain type of plant. And people do respect the need for plants to go to seed in the wild. And I think that it's just important that if people look for, look for a single expression, maybe they pay attention to the batch size, and just try to source from brands that have a little bit of transparency as to where the mezcal and the agave is coming from and how it's made.
Okay, and since the word sustainability came up, we're now going to jump over to a question from our very good friend, mutual friend, Dalton Crease over at Maguey Malate, the Mescalero of the Month Club. I love Dalton. I love his project, especially right now when it's so hard. Niki can't get down to Oaxaca. So it's nice that Dalton is bringing Oaxaca to us. Anyway, the question, which I shall throw to you, Alex, is what do you see as the biggest environmental factor to impact the sustainability of mezcal production in the long term? Think 2070 for these producers. So is it water security, agave availability, firewood, agave genetic diversity, plagues, whatever? If you had to choose just one issue, what would that issue be? What are some of the ways that you at Rezpiral have tried to address or engage with some of these issues? And what have you come to learn?
I'd say 2070 is pretty far away. I'd say a lot of these factors are just so interrelated that I don't know that you can reduce. I don't think you can reduce it to like a variable. And I'm just one dude who's been working with mezcal and mezcaleros for a couple of years. But what I would say is over the past couple of years, working with the mezcaleros I source from, I try to take on some of the burden of work in terms of being responsible in terms of producing agave and replanting agave. And so what I've come to learn is that, it's quite a cost. I mean, part of, I think, the economy from sales for me go into the vivero, and then from the vivero, bring agave that are, that come from seeds from different areas, practices to bring those agaves back. And when I've learned that when I do bring them back, maybe it's like 1,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 or 5,000, it's a lot. It's a big cost, both in terms of organizing to be able to, I think as Niki, spoke about, the autonomy of land. I mean, these are independent mezcaleros that are intertwined with municipios, with cargos, with tequios. And it's a lot of work to be able to have access to land. And then another level, which is kind of not confirming land, but having land available for, let's say, 8, 10, 15 years, having enough trust, having enough rights or faith that you can actually, that the agave can be planted there. This isn't like private property plots where you sign a contract and that's it. I mean, these are all very, very complicated, very, very, flowing histories from one year to the next. So the first part, freeing up land or finding land, whether it's one's own, whether it's part of the municipio, whether it's a neighbor, a friend, a colleague, freeing up that land is difficult. Making it ready to receive agave is a lot of labor. And then putting the agave into the ground is more labor. And then beyond that, of course, I think water is one of the most essential things. And what I've come to learn is that agave is not really this super invincible, plant that will just survive, in any condition. I think the ones you see in really, really, really difficult conditions, I think it's maybe more of a testament to the strength of that seed that just did well there, or really just found a nook and those roots really just took. Because in the nursery and in transplanting, I mean, you see how much care these plants require. And what I've been seeing is the challenge of having enough water to keep these plants healthy after they've been transplanted. So of course, I think on mezcaleros' minds is water first and foremost. I think that's kind of, obviously, if you have the luxury to look beyond that, because in your position it's a luxury to then look at firewood and, all right, well, we need to put our resources into foresting areas. I mean, I think in a lot of situations of mezcaleros, they're lucky to have the resource and the support to be able to plant agave. So I think the other issues, as important as they may be, and there are programs available, conservation programs that are working with these things. Sometimes they're accessible, sometimes they're not. But I've been pretty inspired to see that the work that these mezcaleros are taking on in terms of replanting. And the beautiful thing for me is it's not really, I've had some people in the US say, oh, so you plant agave and then you make mezcal from that and you sell it. And it's not really the case. What you learn really quickly here is agave is it's borrowed time, right? And it may even be what one mezcalero cuts, it's cutting from the labor of someone else. And it's not really spoken so much, but it's very clear that when agave is put into land, its future is kind of uncertain, and that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Beautiful. Did you? Okay. So
I'll comment on something there.
Yeah.
So in the case of Logoche, and actually almost every mezcalero that I know in the Miahuatlan region right now cultivates their own agave. People have started to grow trees, knowing that they need their firewood. But the issue that is totally out of people's hand is rain, and there's just no water right now. We're very fortunate that an hour ago it was drizzling here in the city, but Miahuatlan hasn't gotten a heavy rain yet this year, and that doesn't just affect the mezcal, but it also that's how people grow their crops and survive, because most people are subsistence farmers first and foremost. And so global warming at the end of the day is the biggest threat to all of this.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'll add one thing to what you say, Max, and I think there's another observation I've made here is just learning that, well, there's less and less rain because of deforestation. You have less forest, thus you have less humidity, and rains here are very isolated. I mean, they just kind of snake through wherever they want to go. And it can be, pouring in Oaxaca, and then here I am, it's 8 kilometers away, and this is the first rain we've received. Well,
yeah, and there's regarding deforestation, of course, you have problems with the timber industry in all of these out Oaxaca that have been tumbado, just completely cleared in order to plant espadín. And so when you're drinking those really cheap espadines, maybe give some thought into where that agave is coming from and what's involved with cultivating on that scale, because Oaxaca does not have a lot of flat land like Jalisco does, where you can implement that type of monoculture, which of course has its own biological consequences as well. So there are these limits.
And I think that practice certainly varies from mezcalero to mezcalero, but I think there is a recognition, at least amongst some mezcaleros that I've seen, that, wow, you can grow agave amongst other things. You don't have to clear cut a piece of land in order to grow agave. Although the interesting thing is there is, with like ejido land, for example, some municipios have requirements, that the piece of land be fully cleared in order for it to indicate that it's being worked, right? And, in social constructs where if a piece of land if agave is kind of being grown amongst trees and it's a piece of ejido land, well, then you're probably more subject to agave being stolen. So there are, I think maybe as that obstacle comes, hopefully some institutions and organizations will help push and promote more of like a practice of agave being part of an agroforestry. I hear language of like reforestation of agave, and it sounds beautiful, right? Oh, we're going to reforest with agave, but agave being treated as an agricultural product or a crop I mean, it's agricultural clearing like anything else, and that's going to contribute to to less rain. So that's certainly a challenge.
The folks at Maestros del Mezcal have helped in putting forward a new federal law. We'll see what happens as this goes. But one of its objectives is to protect the sort of the biocultural importance of the agave and mezcal, of course, but also the plant, the material for making mezcal. There are changes on the ground as well. Of course, there are a lot of forces that really don't want to see that happen, that don't want to see the blockading of interstate sale of agave within Mexico. So we'll see what happens, but there is a really solid movement on the ground to take this in a different direction that I think is perhaps a better direction.
Okay, beautiful. So we've got a little less than a half an hour left. So I want to jump into some of these other questions. I'm going to skip one of them about wild agave and rare agave, because it feels kind of like, to me, like we've answered the question. As it becomes harder and harder to acquire, is there a dilemma and bring it to market?
Can I comment on that, Lou? Actually,
yeah, sure, yeah.
So that's like a funny double-edged sword. So talking just
Max, did you tell you
mezcal was priced the same, and if anything, Espadín. Am I breaking up?
You're breaking up? Yeah.
Right.
Is your girlfriend is she watching YouTube?
She may be watching, but yeah. So agave prices until very recently were pretty similar across the board, and if anything, Espadín may have carried a higher price tag because of the costs involved in acquiring the plant, because it's not really endemic to most of Oaxaca, seemingly, perhaps more. The Espadín was really held in higher regard still is by a lot of these communities. And so, when Tepestate or Coyote or Bicuiche and Espadín were priced kind of around the same, Tobalá included, that didn't create much of an incentive to continue to propagate these plants, because some do take a really long time to mature and maybe don't have a very high sugar content. And in the 1980s, when Jalisco came down and clear cut, hundreds of hectares from the conversations I'm referring to took place in Miahuatlan, so it's a Miahuatlan context, but wiped out a lot of different types of Karwinskis and Americana type plants that no longer exist today or on the verge of extinction. And a lot of farmers made the choice to plant Espadín because it was seen as this kind of improved varietal. And so on one hand, it's problematic in maybe consuming these large batches of Arauqueño, if it's even pure Arauqueño, or whatever other cultivar or wild agave. But at the same time, the market has actually, I feel even weird talking about this in this way, but the market has actually put a value on certain plants that previously were not valued in the same way and have already disappeared in the last 20, 30 years. And so by putting a price tag on a wild coyote, you're partially ensuring that people actually continue to propagate that plant. And that's exactly what people in La Roche have done across the board. And people are growing dozens of agave and finding in their seeds that they grow types of agave that they cannot identify. And so there's a lot to be said about advocating for responsible consumption of these spirits. And, that's a conversation as to what that would look like. But I think we shouldn't throw it by the wayside entirely.
It's an interesting point. Like literally marketing these rare agaves is what's helping to keep them alive. That's really fascinating.
Strangely, it's happening.
Okay.
And definitely with like the pulquero species in Miahuatlan, which are these either Agave Americana. Every so often you see these atroviran plants deeper into the east side of the valley, from my experience. But people have started to cultivate these pulquero varieties that had been abandoned 30 years ago. And even javelin, which was planted, or javali is probably how most people know it in Miahuatlan. People add the N. But that was something that was used for for fencing purposes for the most part, and hadn't been replanted for generations because there was so much of it. But now that there's this interest and demand for that mezcal, Mazatlan is buying it up, and who knows where the rest of it is going. And so it's caused people to start planting agaves that their parents maybe didn't grow. So it has some kind of silver lining to it.
Oh, that's very cool. Thank you. So, okay, so let's move to the next question. But before I do, I want to point out we're more than an hour in and nobody has drawn any penises on any of our faces. So far, I'm considering this a win. Okay, and we get to see a beautiful sunset behind Jason, a beautiful Oaxacan sunset. Thank you for that, Jason. Okay, so next question. In fact, unless somebody has the ability to mute me, and I know you don't, I'm going to take a stab at answering, at least starting an answer to this myself. So the question is, what are some of the reasons that you don't certify as mezcal the agave spirits that you sell? And then the follow-up to that, which I can't help with, is, how has it affected your business to not certify those spirits? And how has it affected the producers from whom you have purchased those spirits? So, I want to talk about, the uncertified spirits and why I think you don't do it. In the beginning, when I did the introduction, I was talking about all the things that I really admired and really love about what each of your brands does. And what I love is that they give back so much to the community. But the truth is, in addition to that, I'm also just fascinated by how you bring a sense of that community to the larger market. I don't want to leave anybody with the impression that I don't like certified mezcal. I love certified mezcal. I've got this Q&A to the right here is full of people I know who have brands of mezcal. They're my friends. They're my brothers, sisters, and they have these brands of certified mezcal, and I think they're great. But to me, the real magic isn't even the mezcal, isn't the agave spirit. To me, the real magic of what goes on in these rural communities is this multi-generational wisdom of how you approach the world. And we live in this world that is all about efficiency, or I at least. You guys live in Oaxaca. I live in this world that's all about efficiency, and I think efficiency is great, and I strive to be more efficient every day. But I don't think that's the only way to approach the world. And I think it's sort of like this monoculture. I think having one way to approach the world creates things like coronaviruses. And I think this worldview of these small communities is a treasure. And I think it is something that can and should be utilized to help sustain our human species. I think there is a way of thinking in these communities, and I think, we'll talk about COVID-19 soon enough, but I think that we have some serious indications of why we should protect the communities. And I really feel like with your brands going in and helping to sustain the communities by bringing the spirits in the exact form in which they are consumed in those communities out into the broader world, you're giving people a reason to go back and look at those communities and to look at the importance of the multi-generational wisdom. So yeah, this liquid is an expression of that multi-generational wisdom, but there's so many other far more important expressions of it. But we never get to those other expressions if we don't fall in love with the bottles you bring back, which causes us to go to those communities. That's the end of my sermon. So if you guys want to speak to why you don't certify rock and roll, and otherwise, then I'd ask you how it affects your business and affects the producers. Go.
There's a lot to unpack with what you just said there. I'll try to take a stab at it. The reason that we don't certify as a brand, if we go back to the origins of how this brand started, we started as a back bar project for a restaurant, Mezcaleria. And it's not very common that Mezcaloteca, you wouldn't find Mezcaloteca certified mezcal there. You wouldn't find it at In Situ. You wouldn't find it at Mezcalogia. You wouldn't find it at El Cortijo. You wouldn't find it at the Mezcalorita. It's common practice to buy small batches of mezcal, direct to bar and bottle it yourself. That's how you're able to demonstrate a large variety of whether it be regions or whether it be production techniques or agaves. So for us, we kind of kept that going. We were 2 years in, we existed as a brand, that was only available in one place that can seat 32 people for 2 years. And when we looked at certifying or exporting to the States, we went through the process of lab testing with a couple of producers and realized that the chemical parameters that are the quote unquote, the rules for certification of mezcal would have made it that some of our producers would fail that test. However, they would pass the standards for destilado de agave or aguardiente de agave, and they far and away pass with flying colors international standards for what is safe to consume. And something that, to kind of relate, this might be very unusual to relate this, but if you at all are interested in linguistics, there's a big debate in the world of grammar, which is prescriptivism versus descriptivism. And a prescriptivist is a person who will tell you how to talk, that it's appropriate to say this and it's not appropriate to say that. And descriptivism is essentially how people actually talk, by saying y'all, by saying ain't, and not casting any sort of negativity around it. We wanted to take a descriptivist approach. I wanted to, as a brand, encapsulate how mezcaleros were making mezcal before I ever met them. And had we wanted to certify, I would have had to intervene in the process. I would have had to ask producers to make cuts in different places in their distillations. I would have asked them to change the fermentation process in the case of a couple. I would have affected a technique that they've learned not just in the past few years, but have received, through sometimes up to 6 generations. And I didn't feel comfortable doing that. It's kind of funny because I think sometimes people can see uncertified mezcal as like a political statement or something that's kind of raging against the machine or the system. But in reality, it was the way that we could empower the producers who we work with to keep on trucking the way that they've always wanted to do it. I have a lot of respect for denominations of origins, and including those of tequila and mezcal. The birthplace of the denomination of origin mezcal was totally necessary 25 years ago when it was formed, because of the market being flooded with altered or adulterated spirits that weren't 100% agave, that nationally and internationally brought the name and reputation of the category down. Sometimes there's a debate that exists that there can be one or the other, or at least that's the way that it's framed. But in reality, no, these are just two categories that can not sit, but kind of walk alongside each other, if that makes sense. But that's why we do it. There's really not much more to it other than allowing producers to make mezcal the way they want to.
Sorry. So we've got less than 15 minutes left. My computer actually tells me after a couple seconds. We've got less than 15 minutes left. Does anybody want to add to that, or should we move on to another question?
I think Niki and I'd probably like to talk about that a little bit.
And let me just say too, if you guys are comfortable going longer than 8:30,
for sure. I'm like, I don't really have much to do, just to work on this bottle here.
I got a lot of popcorn left, so
I've been known to go all night.
I'm about to pour myself a mezcal, guys. I'm ready. We can keep on going for as long as you want.
God bless. Okay, so Max and Niki, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think a big part of it for us has to do with the scale in which we're working, the quantities, batch sizes of mezcal that people make. In order to comply with CRM, with Comercom, or however, CRM, it really would have required us to run a very different type of company. And, we don't own any of the means of production, and we don't have these contracts. And in order to sort of work within the parameters that the system has created, it really requires those type of things, and that's not why we're here. That's not why we're in this. And so Destilado de Agave in some way for us was kind of like almost the only way to do what we thought was right, and also according to what the community was telling us, really, like, it was all right. It was a good way to proceed. And I can say that tangibly a benefit for the folks that we work with in selling what we later commercialize as Destilado de Agave is that at the end of the day, they receive a higher price point. A lot of companies that make certified or bottling certified mezcal are baking in a whole bunch of administrative costs and the certification costs into their purchase price. And so, or perhaps removing it, cutting it from the purchase price. And so at the end of the day, I think a responsibly run Destilado de Agave company actually has the means of paying more per liter, perhaps than a certified brand. And that's not a good situation, because we're all in favor of regulation. It has nothing to do with that. I think it just has to do with the way this current state of regulation exists and how it affects traditional mezcal production and, the people who make it. So if Niki, you want to, anybody else?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that we don't own any of the means of production. We don't own land, and for all of us here, we all know how complicated mezcal production is in terms of land management and just the supply chain. So it's a very complicated operation. You have to orchestrate all sorts of interests and information collection. And really, we would have to be a kind of compliance company or a logistics company, and fly drones over people's land and take surveys of all the agave that they're growing, and go in and check the sugar content of everything to be able to bring all of the spirits that are currently available in the States and in Europe to market as certified. And so, because we're running such a small company and operation, and we're running really lean, which is one of the reasons why I think we will manage to survive this whole COVID crisis. We simply just can't really afford to even pretend that we can manage the complexity of the production of mezcal. So yeah, I think it has a lot to do with just meeting producers where they are and how they're working. We're not ordering batches, so we are working within what people are actually producing, and we're trying to commercialize the batches that they are, just going to make, rather than saying, "Hey, Hermogenes, make me, 3,000 liters of espadín and I'll buy it, and I want it to taste like this and this." So it's complicated work, and we're managing a lot of different cultural factors as well.
And maybe I just offer one thing, which is maybe just a rephrasing of what we've all just said. But Destilado de Agave is actually it's a great mechanism to allow small producers to continue to exist, to commercialize their products when they're producing in these small scale traditional ways. So
yeah,
it's
absolutely.
Great.
And I think that I will just, I see Susan is asking this question about transparency. And I think that, again, as Max said, none of us, I think, are against regulation or against transparency. And we all provide a lot of information on our websites, on our bottles, et cetera. And I think that this is where we have to really believe in the force of community and the ability to hold each other accountable. And one of the reasons that we're all here today is that we all do know each other. We all, see into each other's backyards. We live in a place. And I think that we can see an example in the natural wine movement, which is something that has existed for, at least since the 70s, without any real definition of what is natural wine. It invites a type of engagement from consumers, which I think that is really incredible, and it's an incredible opportunity. I mean, we're fielding questions from people constantly. We're available. We're here. If folks have questions about the fermentation, about what happened, we have pictures. You know, we offer a lot more transparency than I think that almost any other spirit category does.
It's sort of, in fact, how you position yourself.
Mm-hmm.
But you know, but something that you said that I find really interesting is you sort of hold each other accountable,
Yeah.
and which I think is beautiful, right? Because just as these individual communities draw me to Mexico, certainly, you're building your own community. But how do you hold each other accountable? Like, if you found, so if Niki, if you found out that Alex was doing something different than what was on his label, what would you do?
I mean, I think that, like, I wouldn't necessarily know, but like but yeah, I think that we all talk to each other, and yeah, and there's a community beyond just the 5 of us here today. That includes a lot of folks who are listening in today. And, you know, this is like an incredible thing about the Agave Spirits category, that we have this beautiful community, and that you all are asking all these incredible hard-hitting questions and trying to get to the bottom of things. So, you know, this is where I think that we are building a culture together. It's not, you know, I really appreciate Jason's comparison to this issue in linguistics, but I think that, like, more than just trying to approach things as they are, understanding the ways in which our involvement in these communities is also affecting change, and the way that we are also involved in building what Mezcal is in the world, or what agave spirits are in the world. It's certainly not static. Tradition is not static. And, you know, I think that we have a big opportunity here.
Yeah, and I think I can add just one thing. I mean, you know, Jason, we've spoken a handful of times about, you know, some big names or some more commercial, traditionally commercially export focused. I won't say extraction focused. I won't go that far. Where, you know, setups that we're in a way following, and I think it's interesting to also reflect that we're kind of from a different generation, where economic inclusivity is, at least for me, I'll speak for myself, has been something that I've viewed in my lifetime in the U.S. kind of decline. You know, the diversity of who gets to play the game, who gets to participate, you know, who gets to be in the shop, you know, because there's a lot of people standing in front of those doors, I think, across the board. And I think, you know, Niki, as you mentioned, like this community, I think in a way, yeah, loosely, I think we could all, you know, stand for certain values, which, I mean, I bet we could all agree that it's just in a way being decent, but, and perhaps, you know, this mechanism for doing it is the best way to kind of be decent or respectful of, you know, of diversity, of inclusivity, of the ability for small producers to participate and play the game, you know, and you know, I personally see myself as a facilitator to do that, not much more, but I think it's a great little, yeah, community that we're forming through the fact that we're, yeah, helping different people play the game and be there with the big boys, so to speak.
Okay, so let's move into the next question, which I think is an important one to address before we leave, and hopefully we'll be able to stay longer, but I really don't want to miss this one. So the question is, as we are all people who were not born in Mexico or into the culture of Mezcal, what are some challenges and limitations that we face in representing the interests and craft of the producers that we work with, that you work with? And what of your own cultural baggage have you encountered while engaging in this work?
And start that off. Well, I grew up in rural northern New Mexico as a a minority majority. And so all of the sort of weird stuff I'd face here and like the cultural baggage I bring with me here, I grew up with. So that's nothing foreign. And I grew up in a fairly radical home. My father was an attorney for the La Raza Unida party in northern New Mexico. And so, you know, I was born on what used to be Ejido land that is now conquered and acquired by the United States. And if you live in the western part of the United States, those state and federal forests that you like to recreate in are all occupied lands. And so I grew up with all of this very much at the forefront of my mind. And I try to be very sensitive about the way I move in Mexico and in rural Oaxaca. I keep, you know, try to keep that present. But of course, you know, being foreigners, it's different. But I think one thing I'd like to make clear, and I think there's often a misconception about sort of who's a foreigner in the world of Mezcal and who's not. And really, if you're not born into it, you're from the outside. And if you're not from these communities, you are from the outside. So I think sometimes, like, you know, being a gringo in Mezcal, it's not just us gabachos who were born in the United States, but it's anybody who was not from a mezcalero community or comunidad mezcalera. And so that actually changes the conversation a little bit, looking at it from that perspective.
And I'll let somebody else go after this. I just want to say I got a notice from Zoom. Apparently, there might be a 2-hour max. We're at 2 hours and 2 minutes roughly. So we might get shut off. So just talk really quickly. Go.
Well, I mean, yeah. I should do not what you just told me to do. Shouldn't have started this thing at 6:30, I realize. But what am I trying to say? I think that it's again, you know, going back a little bit to a previous answer that I offered about there being a contrast of certified versus non-certified. The same thing is true sometimes in this community. There is a conversation about Mexican-owned versus non-Mexican owned. And it's important, you know, to just what Max just said. I think it's great to highlight that and you know, point that out, is that if you are not from a pueblo mezcalero, you are a güero, you are a foreigner, you are a forastero, extranjero, you're not from here. Your relationship will never be of a mezcal community. And sometimes there are value propositions cast upon something being a Mexican-owned brand versus a non-Mexican-owned brand. But I find it a little, it's not black and white, because someone who has a brand and they live in Mexico City and they fly in once a year or so to see, you know, quote unquote, you know, their mezcalero, versus, you know, the four of us on this chat live here, and we've all lived here. I think between the four of us are over 2 decades combined. We've made a conscious decision in our lives to pursue a career that is really enriching in many ways that are not monetarily. And we are part of the Oaxaca de Juarez, the Oaxaca City community, and the community, as well as the economy. I think that's as much as you can probably ask for from a brand owner that's not actually a brand owned by a producer, if that makes sense. But this is a place that it's magical. It draws special people. I think we all have different international experience that help prepare us for this. You know, my own living in Panama for 3 years, working in a small campesino community, and then being a translator for Hispanic migrants for 2 years. The last decade has been working with people of Latin American descent, either directly in their community or directly in their second community in the States. We share that. You know, I think it's easy to cast a stone at a gringo owner, and there's maybe a little bit more legitimacy of throwing that stone when that guy is a fly-in from LA once a year type of thing, if that makes sense.
Okay, that works for me.
And placing mezcal in a historical context, a lot has changed in the last 5-10 years in terms of how these communities and the mezcaleros are perceived by the outside world. You know, the colonial legacy in Mexico is very, very strong, and a lot of these communities historically have been hyper marginalized. And so, you know, there's this whole discourse about that historical influence in what's going on today. Just kind of.
Mhm.
Okay. So,
I think I'm good. Go ahead.
okay. Okay, great. So we've got a lot of questions asking about coronavirus and how it is affecting the communities in Oaxaca, but also questions about how you think that it's going to affect the future of agave spirits, both in Mexico and in the rest of the world. You guys, you work in the communities. Are you seeing any signs of people suffering from the virus?
In Miahuatlan, San Nicolas has some cases. In the municipio of Miahuatlan de Porfirio Diaz, there are cases. San Nicolas is a producing community. Not trying to like throw shade, but I know Comercom was still sending people out through the countryside to verify things up until very recently. But in Logoche, things have been pretty much shut down. The biggest hit to the local economy, I think, isn't that we're not being able to move the mezcal that they produce. It's that there aren't fiestas happening. The kind of like the big local economy has to do with weddings and bautizos and graduation parties and your Saints Day, like the Fiesta del Pueblo brings in a tremendous amount of money. And so, you know, when you don't have a wedding happening, you don't have that movement of people, you don't have that consumption, that demand for mezcal, and so there's no local sales either. And in Oaxaca, we do have this kind of like weird semi-dry law enacted right now. And so, yeah, I think it's really the rural economy is kind of shutting down and not being able to move. That's the biggest threat to mezcal in times of coronavirus. And then undoubtedly there should be some silver linings to this, in that maybe people start to look at the plants that they cultivate differently. And, you know, maybe you don't want to just knock that hill over and plant some espadín, because you maybe should grow some corn there and keep that milpa intact. And, you know, we'll see where this plays out.
Alex, you look like you want to say something.
Well, not especially, but yeah, I mean, I've, you know, at least where I am in Tule, you know, it's pretty interesting to see kind of how, you know, these pueblos down here are very much still deeply set up in a local manner for local trade, you know, producing their own food. How quickly here, at least, like little puestos, little stalls have been installed outside. It's been pretty interesting. I mean, I make beer, and now I'm all of a sudden trading with all these people, and so I really go to the grocery store because the butcher gives me meat for beer, and it's somehow natural here. It's somehow that returning to that economy is certainly, I think, it's a source of resiliency that I'd say maybe in the U.S., you know, I think the U.S. maybe has gone to such a machine where it's maybe more in danger because it doesn't have that history or that memory of how to work in a local way. That memory here is it's not just a memory, but it's very much present. It's very much active. So I think while mezcal may be obviously demand is going to go down, but I think people in the back of their heads, they have lots of other things to do.
So I just need a point of clarification from you, Alex, then. So you're trading beer for meat and tomatoes. Is that accurate? Because if I've got that correct, you're no longer allowed to dispute with me whether or not you're a hippie. Okay, I do have it correct.
Okay.
You know, Niki,
I love it. We haven't got to that point in the city yet, for sure. But first and foremost, you know, how this is affecting the communities in which I work. Fortunately, no reported cases of any community where we go. Most places have transport pretty cut off. And then probably where that question is really aimed is economically. This is a really illuminating time, you know, when we think about like our personal economics and the economy in general, because you would think sometimes with the way the producers, you know, tend to have very modest lifestyles, that they would be suffering, greatly by not having, a brand buy the most recent batch they just produced. In reality, these producers are the owners of their own land, of their own homes. Oftentimes they crop their own food, or they get it from a family member or a neighbor. Communities work with each other and they provide for one another. So the stresses that we have in the Western world, or rather the developed world, which is, people being evicted, people losing their homes, people defaulting on loans, people losing their cars. People own what they have here. This is more than anything else. This is actually kind of like, this is maybe a pause. This is slowing down a bit of momentum, but it's not a complete derailing of the capitalistic train that we have in the developed world. So obviously we're all worried about the people we work with, but it feels like that impact, on the way that it can destroy a life, or the way that people work their entire lives and they're saving for something, or just making ends meet. I don't think that'll be the case with anyone we work with, fortunately. And so that's maybe that's something people can relax a little bit to think about. I don't know.
Yeah, I'm just going to throw in here too a plug for a program that Sacred that we put together to try and help bring some money into these communities where we're selling futures and spirits, so that people can go online and use PayPal to send money directly to mezcaleros in Oaxaca, or an intermediary in one case, Randall, who's been leading tours down in Oaxaca forever. There are two different batches, lists of producers you can purchase from. You buy it now, you pay the mezcalero now, and then the mezcalero holds onto the bottles for you until you get down to Oaxaca, which to me feels like you're not just helping that community with money right now. You're also sort of promising yourself that you're going to get to return to Oaxaca, which I got to say, for me at least, is something that, like, I mean, you're laughing, Max. You're in Oaxaca, and
maybe I'll never leave again.
And maybe you'll never leave again. And if but like to Jason's point, like if I had to choose between right now, between being in Chicago where I am, or being in Santa Catarina, Minas, it feels a lot safer to me in Minas, which is shocking. I never thought I'd say that. Maybe not Centro.
Don't come.
and I will not come. Until it's safe. But yeah, so if anybody wants to purchase futures, Oaxacan futures, if you just go to sacred.mx and you go to our, I think it's campaigns, the last option is Oaxacan futures, and it leads you to the links so you can purchase these bottles and then pick them up a year, 2 years, maybe 3 months. 3 months, pick them up.
I mean, I think, just another comment, that a reflection that maybe some people are having, everyone's having, maybe it's totally inconvenient, but I think it's in our face, is that what happens when, we reduce our energy consumption, right? So that flight down to Oaxaca, it's just great. It's going to be so exciting, and visit these people and visit that people, those people. Well, obviously it's inconvenient that we can't do it. Or that those trucks can't be just going nonstop. But I mean, you look at we're all seeing the results in terms of, how Earth is responding. And I think it's kind of demanding at least a reflection, and to see if, questioning with me, okay, well, will we actually adjust ourselves in terms of behavior? Can humans affect their behavior in terms of, I need to jet set, or I need to consume at this level? I think it's a huge opportunity, obviously, to reset in some ways,
Boy, what you're saying, it's really interesting to me, Alex. I mean, what you're saying in essence is the illustration of what I love about rural Mexico. I mean, it's an inconvenience, and they live with, I mean, even the process of making these spirits is inconvenient. And it's not about just do things that are convenient, just do things you want to do. It's do things the right way. There's a very clear vision of what the right way is.
I think it goes beyond that. I think it goes into, I mean, if you look at stay in place, or stay at home, or stay in your town, right? It's this inconvenience, but that's local rural identity, right? Yeah. You do cargos, you do your work for the municipality in exchange for land rights, in exchange to have access to natural resources. And so you conserve those resources. And it's interesting to see that while this virus is kind of forcing people to be in one place, while that in rural Mexico is what you do, right? That's who you are, because you spend a long enough time in your place and taking care of your lands and being with your people, it becomes an identity. And I think it's also an interesting moment to kind of reflect on that, right?
Yep. Yep. Max keeps putting his finger up.
Yeah,
I don't think it's 'cause he's
I
pissed at
want to
me.
comment on something just because I think it's really easy to romanticize subsistence farming and these rural agricultural communities. And like, yes, it's very true that people are better equipped there than they are where I am in the Centro, or, you know, where you are, Lou, in Chicago, to handle their own food resources and how they're going to eat. That is true. The alternative to that argument, they were just kind of staying on that point, is that there's zero. The hospitals don't have hot water. The hospitals don't have soap. And so if COVID-19 actually hits these communities, it's going to be a really serious situation, and growing your own food and corn, beans, your whatever, is not going to be enough, because the system that exists in Mexico as a whole is not sufficient, and certainly in rural environments, there's just no social netting.
You know, I absolutely get that. I appreciate that. I understand that. But, you know, there's a really interesting piece in The Guardian this week that points out that a lot of the people who are being hit the hardest by this virus are being hit the hardest very specifically because they live in households that are immersed in chemicals, and the specific things they point out that are affecting how the body reacts to the coronavirus are Teflon and BPA. And the suggestion is that these chemicals and other chemicals have affected our immune response. And in fact, the problem is how our bodies are reacting to the virus, not the virus itself.
Sure. Well, a lot of people are cooking no longer with clay, but with aluminum or, you know, Teflon pots and pans. Oil, like refined oils and sugar, was introduced to Miahuatlan in like the mid 1980s. So diets have really changed. And clearly one of the few things we do know about COVID-19 is that it attacks people with preconditions, primarily in like blood sugar levels. Like diabetes is the #1 killer in Mexico. And when you get in these rural communities, there's often no money or no medicine available. Even if you have the money, that medicine comes from far away. And so, and your dialysis treatment is even further away. And so there's just a lot of kind of structural inequities that really factor into all this, I think.
Okay, so we are now a solid 15 minutes past. I think we should wrap this up, and I don't want to wrap it up on a negative point like that. You know, I want to, God, I just want to say, like, this has been a great Friday night for me. It's shocking to me how many people have tuned in, and a lot of people have dropped out, and I'm suspecting it's because it's disgusting to watch me eat popcorn, but I'm not going to stop eating popcorn. But it's shocking to me. We were over 100 for a long time, and even now, I think we're, good God, between the two services, yeah, we're like at 87 people. You know, I love salute. I love that so many people care so much about these spirits and this issue, that they want to hear what you guys have to say. And I think what you have to say is really important. Again, not, you know, I actually like the people at Zignum. I'm friendly with the people at Zignum. It's not what I find the most magical and beautiful about Oaxaca. This is, and I'm so happy to see that so many people care so much about it. They want to see this continue enough that they're going to stay up on a Friday night to watch you guys speak.
Yeah, thanks, folks.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay. Catch you guys, well, not in Oaxaca soon. We'll catch you online.
All right.
Bye.
All right, y'all have a good night. Thanks for tuning in.